Good morning, everybody. Um, Welcome to How to Get Your Students to Think, Read, and Write in the age of Facebook and Twitter. I imagine one of the reasons we have, I think what Anna Olson told me, the largest enrollment of any Ann Farron conference is because this is something you're facing in your classroom or in your own lives. The lay of the land during our hour and 15 or 17 minutes together is I'm going to introduce our panelists. They're going to speak about their specialties and their angst and their research and their ideas. We're going to talk a little among ourselves, and then we want to hear from you because we know that many of you in here, along with us, have prescriptive ideas and solutions to what's going on in the Twitter sphere and how to get your students to be less distracted and more focused. My name is Iris, and I am a social media and news addict. I often sleep, admittedly, with my iPhone slumped on my chest, and it vibrates and rings at all moments in the evening and early morning, and I jump because I want to see who's calling with what news. My iPad is inches away on my nightstand. My writing, admittedly, is not as clear or easy as it was in the days when Valerie Strauss over here from the Washington Post and I were younger writers together in the 80s at United Press International. We weren't tweeting and Facebooking or checking our emails compulsively, constantly, like the addicts I am today, and many of you possibly are today. You, my Facebook friends here, were the first people to wish me happy birthday, and I knew because on August 31st, I was on Facebook at 1:40 a.m. I'm going to share with you I am Iris Krasno. I teach in the School of Communication and in the School of Professional Extended Study. I've been teaching writing and journalism here for about 25 or so years. I started when I was 11. And I just, the first thing I tell students, and now I'm teaching adult women a course in Voices of Women, where writing is essential, part of their curriculum. And the first thing I tell students, and I tell myself and I tell my 4 children, is thinking clearly and writing well, whether you want to be a journalist or a writer or not, is the backbone of a successful life. I know many of you come from different disciplines other than the School of Communication or the writing program. And whatever your students or you have to do in your lives to ascend in your careers, which many of us have to do to bolster our enormous salaries, writing well is the ingredients for a successful life. I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. To my right is Chris Lawrence. Professor Lawrence is a full-time professor in the School of Communications Journalism Division, where she teaches undergraduate and graduate writing courses in media studies and journalism history, and she also teaches general ed courses. Chris has worked as a reporter and senior editor for Congressional Quarterly for a number of years and as a contributing writer and editor for a number of Congressional Quarterly books. She has served as an SOC adjunct professor for 12 years before she began teaching full-time for the past 4 years. Kendall Brightman is my former feature article writing student and has been Chris Lawrence's student and some of you else in in this audience. And Kendall is a senior at American University. Kendall is in the School of Communications studying print journalism and has the School of Public Affairs and is in the School of Public Affairs studying law. Kendall is originally from Havertown, Pennsylvania, and she moved to Washington, D.C. in hopes of becoming a political long-form journalist. Today, she is the managing editor of the Eagle's Arts and Entertainment section, and she just got an internship writing for USA Today's Washington Bureau. And we picked Kendall as a plant because she believes in long-form writing and taking the time to write. I remember one of my journalism professors in 1916 telling me to write well and think clearly and tell the truth. The truth takes time. And so much of what we do today, we don't have the time. Valerie Strauss, to my immediate left, is a longtime friend. We worked together, as I said, at United Press International at 14th and I Street. And Valerie, as many of you know, is the education writer at the Washington Post. Valerie has been covering education from pre-K through graduate school for more than 15 years and now authors the Answer Sheet blog for the Washington Post. She previously worked as an assignment foreign editor for the Washington Post, assistant, well, what the hell, as a congressional, your bosses aren't here, as a congressional correspondent and national security editor for Reuters and deputy foreign editor for United Press International. And she was a longtime editor and on the local staff of the LA Times. So our mission in here this morning is to slow time down. So please turn your cell phones off or on silence, gasp. We are all multitaskers in here. And our goal with this panel and our hour and 16 minutes together is to whittle away your electronic distractions so you can be single-minded along with our panel in sharing our ideas, your ideas, research, and anecdotes, and how we can enhance our students' writing and thinking abilities while they are, like many of us, social media addicts. But unlike us, they grew up communicating in poorly written snippets that spring off the top of their heads with bad or no punctuation, and they end their sentences with lines that say, "Pardon my typos." This is when we don't even allow misspells or typos in our own classes. Writing well is the backbone of a successful life, and to do so well, it takes time. So first, we're going to hear from Chris Lawrence, Professor Lawrence, on what she knows about thinking clearly, writing better, and all that.
Part of the reason I was interested in this topic when Iris asked me about it is I teach a freshman class called Understanding Media. It's a class of 50, and often it's the first class the students take here at American University, at least in the School of Communication. And as the course itself sort of looks at the history and the evolution of the media. We look at all, from radio, television, film on. And one of the assignments I give them is what we call a media fast. And I tell the students that they have to try to disconnect from all forms of media. I used to say 24 hours, but that proved totally impossible. So now I tell them for 10 to 12 hours they should try to live without any type of media. Of course, I do say they have to do their homework for their other classes, because that always comes up. But anyway, and then I have them write a little paper about the experience. And I have to say, these papers have become, well, they're always very interesting, because they usually start out saying, "This was the worst day of my life." And then they go on and explain what it's like to be sort of disconnected today. And I enjoy reading them because it gives me a little insight into the students. But recently I've become more concerned because they often sound like they have an addiction, some of them. And I do think there is sort of an addictive quality to some of this technology. So for example, I had students say, well, when I was disconnected, I became very fidgety. I began to shake when I realized I couldn't go on Facebook. Not going on my social media sites was like a day without food or air. It was comparable to withdrawal from smoking. Some said I found that I automatically went to Facebook or Twitter without even thinking. Then this was sort of interesting. Just this past semester when I did this, some of the students wrote that because they couldn't use their phones and they were disconnected when they tried to talk to their friends, all their friends were on their phones. And they said, wow, that was kind of rude. And then they said, but I do that. Anyway, and then they said they began to feel very stressed because they couldn't connect with things. So I would sometimes point this out to them. I, talk to them after the papers and say, this is a concern. You need to think about this. If you can't put your phone down, for 15 minutes, for 8 hours doesn't seem like such a long time to me, you may have an issue. I have to just tell you, my favorite line of all, though, was this one young woman wrote at the end of her paper, "This whole experiment made me glad I'm not Amish." Anyway, having done this over the years, I also began to talk to them about how this impacts their writing, because I do really believe this. And because I teach the class, I also have them read articles on research being done now on how all this multitasking affects how we think and how we write. And so I've sort of come up with 4 ideas, I guess, that you could take back to your classes and tell them, particularly in terms of writing. And that, you know, we're losing some of these skills today because we're so constantly connected. So, to be a good writer, to be a clear and precise writer, you have to have focus. You have to have some concentration. You need silence, and it requires some time and effort. And ultimately, I say to them, you need to learn to rewrite and edit yourself, which is just, you know, another good skill to have. So anyway, I have them read articles talking about focus and concentration, because there's been much research done on the fact that actually people who multitask are not actually good at multitasking. MIT has done studies where they study students' brain waves and they multitask, and then they quiz them afterwards, and they all are terrible multitaskers. They can't answer the questions of what they were reading when they were doing different things. There's a wonderful film called Digital Nation that Frontline has put out that I show my class, and you might be interested in showing it to them. And what I love, though, is all the MIT students are like, we're great multitaskers, we know what we're doing. And then the researchers say to them after the experiment, no, you're not. You're bad. You can't do this. It means you're not focusing on one thing. And, you know, the students themselves are sort of amazed at this. So I think it's a good thing to point out to them that that doesn't really work. The other article I have them read is about how people today are reading differently because of technology and the internet. People do not read deeply anymore. We basically scan information on the internet. That's, you know, been proven again through most research, because we're looking for snippets of information. We're not, you know, reading to sort of do critical analysis. So in one article I have them read by a woman who wrote in the Wilson Quarterly, she says that it's really book reading that teaches us how to read deeply, to actually remember and try to comprehend what we're reading, that not just doing this scanning, and that, you know, book reading is actually declining now, people feel. So if you can say to your classes, you know, take the time, read this chapter closely, try not to read it all the time on you know, on the internet or whatever. She has an excellent quote, though. I didn't want to go into too many quotes, but I'll just give you this one. She says, what's happened over time is that the immediate quality of this constant stream of images undermines the self-control we have to engage with the written word. And so we find ourselves living in a highly literate society that chooses not to exercise the privilege of literacy. Indeed, it no longer views literacy as a privilege at all, because we're just scanning things. So, okay, so you can explain to them that they shouldn't be multitasking. I would explain to them that they need some silence in their lives, because this is another thing with my class. I say to them, how many of you go to sleep with your earbuds in or with the television on? About half the class usually raises their hand. And then again, research has shown that your brain needs downtime. It needs some time to rest in order to process information. There have been studies at the University of Michigan and the University of California. I give them these articles to say, at least before you go to sleep, disconnect, because the brain has to rest to process information so that we make memory. And the other thing is, we have to have this information sort of in our subconscious to then come to the top to be creative. That's absolutely true. We all have our best ideas in the shower, right? Because we've disconnected. So I explain that to them and say, you know, try to have some quiet in your life, because I don't think they do. I mean, most of them do their homework, a lot of students with music on. I know that because when they do their little papers for me, they all complain about that they can't listen to music. Okay, then finally I say, good writing requires time and effort. You have to disconnect and sit with that blank page and write. And it's not an easy process. Writing shouldn't be easy. But I think today we're sort of inundated with tons of writing. Everyone's writing. Everyone's twittering. But it's not really good writing. It's just a lot of it, I guess. So I say, the best thing to do is rewrite yourself. Take some time. If you can do it, set your paper aside and don't even look at it for a couple days, and then come back to it and try to edit and write with a clearer mind. Of course, if they're writing their papers the night before, that doesn't usually work. But anyway, so it requires time and effort, and it requires this ability to sort of rewrite and edit yourself. Anyway, if you all are at all interested, I can direct you to some of these articles that have shown that people need some time to, rest and think about things if they're going to end up being good writers.
Well, along with these points, we're going to circle back to Chris, who has, very solid bullet prescriptive points to, and it's in a takeaway sheet. Just to spin out of something that you said before we turn this over to Kendall, I just finished my 6th book, and writing increasingly, and these are 320-page documents, and writing increasingly and thinking clearly, it becomes harder for me because I'm on the internet and I hear a ping, which means an email came in, or a ping, which means I'm getting a tweet from BBC, or, another birthday greeting from my, Facebook friends. And so in order for me to write well and think clearly, I literally go to a little cottage in California for 3 weeks and disconnect because, and it's just elongating the flow of time. And it's just exactly what you said, where you take the time to have peace and silence. In fact, I asked Anna for when you were walking in if we could play sounds of silence and pipe it in. We were going to burn incense and light candles, and one of us plays the guitar. We decided that was taking it a little far. We're going to turn it over to Kendall now, who, what was the class that Kendall had with you last semester?
It's called How the News Media Shape History.
And she was my feature article writing student. And so take it away, Kendall. You can do this.
So I guess, am representing the they and the them that everyone's talking about. So I'm representing the millennials, and I see that word everywhere, and it's driving me crazy. I think that everyone's trying to understand what's going on with us and what we're doing. And we can't read or write, and our faces are always in screens, and we're self-obsessed. So, hello. Nice to meet you. So I think that in some ways that's true. I mean, when I ride my bike on campus, I can't tell you how many people almost run right into me because their faces are in a screen. I've also been in a lot of rooms where I look around, I don't even notice, but everybody has their face in a screen. But I can't say that that's only for people my age. I've also been at the dinner table just before I left to go back to DC with my parents and had to tell both of them to get their faces out of screens. I think that everyone's doing it.
Because they were texting, you told me.
Yeah, they were texting. My dad is an addict with all technology. He has a watch that vibrates when he's 15 feet or more away from his phone. So he doesn't lose it, is what he says, but I just say that he's insane. But I'm more under the impression that I like print and I like long form, and what I'm finding is that I think you were talking about an addiction and how everyone has this addiction, but I think that what's happening in education is that professors and teachers are seeming to feed this addiction, and I don't think that it's right. I think that my assignments have become more, part of it's, I guess, the green initiative of putting all of your writing, all of your papers online, but if you're sending me, I absorb things better when I print it out and I read it myself. I work for the Eagle, the student newspaper, and we went all digital, but we still print everything out to be able to read it and scan through it and actually pick up on mistakes and absorb it. But I think that if you're going to put things online, to make it in a form that if I print it, I'm not holding a magnifying glass up to it so that I can read it. I think that our addiction's being fed when I'm being told to write on discussion boards for homework, and then we don't discuss what we're reading in class. I'd rather rather than sitting on my computer and discussing through a discussion board, I instead maybe going into the classroom and actually discussing it, because that's how you're going to get the most ideas. No one is going back on these discussion boards and rereading what everybody else is saying. And even if you do assign to a follow-up question, because that's what I think professors have been doing to kind of negate this, they're picking one and they're reading it and then they're responding to just that one. So I'm not saying me, but I'm saying people I know. So the question is how to get your students to think, read, and write in the age of Facebook and Twitter. But I think the most important thing is to understand how they are thinking, reading, and writing, and kind of taking that and switching it around. So as far as thinking, we're not really critically thinking anymore. I saw the other day a peer of mine posted but it wasn't the other day, it was like around Christmas time, but she posted an article from The Onion and wrote, it was like 2 million killed on Black Friday, and she wrote, oh my God. I was like, you actually think that's happening? So I don't think that people are actually thinking critically, and they're just taking what's on the internet and going with it. And I also think that one of my classes had us tweet, and I think that tweeting for a class is also just going down that slippery slope of we're being taught to cut our thoughts down to 140 characters or less, and creating discussion from that. But I think that that's starting to lose teaching students how to talk and how to discuss within a class. When I'm posting on a discussion board, there's no one there to rebut what I'm saying. There's nobody there to agree with what I'm saying. I'm just posting it and seeing what happens. So also thinking like a student also in terms of what you're asking on tests. I mean, I know a lot of the people that I have talked to Google a lot of the questions that they're asked on take-home tests. One of my friends told me when I was talking to her about this conference that she Googled all of the questions on her take-home final and found that they were all interview questions asked on People magazine. And so it's just, I think that if you can find it on the internet, so can your students. And so it's, I mean, to demand, I think that we're also just not being asked to deliver what I think that people are capable of. I think the same thing, like posting the discussion board, we can have a great conversation in class, but a lot of the times we're not given that chance. I think reading, I think that students, what we were talking about, that in my feature article writing class, we were given the chance to write about something that we're passionate about. And I think that reading and writing are the same thing. When I have Facebook friends, they share a lot of my interests, so they'll post articles on things that I'm interested in, and I'll read it. And it's like buying a song on iTunes. You can selectively pick what you want instead of what you had to do and buy the entire album. Like newspapers, I can selectively read the articles that I want to read without buying the entire newspaper. It's the same idea that I think that you need to, students are honing in on what they're passionate about, and I think that giving assignments that kind of take somebody to what they're passionate about is going to bring back better results, and getting people away from their computer, to step away from Facebook, to say, I actually want to be working on what I'm working on. Finally, I was also going to say about reading, I think that a lot of the time when I'm assigned readings, when I'm given books, they're in textbook form. And I find that I think that getting books should be something that's exciting. At least it's exciting for me. When I get a book that I'm happy about, I will read it and I'll be very excited about it. But I think that right now we're given books, these textbooks, and we're hunched over these textbooks, dreading flipping through these pages. And I think that if we were given books that are like novels that also, I mean, I read True Enough in one of my classes, and it was a really great book to read, but it was also taught me about what a truth is and what and what asserting truth is, but not actually being true. It taught me a lot, but I was sitting there in my bed reading it and actually enjoying what I was doing. So taking the being hunched over books out of it and having students be able to sit back and relax with the books that are being assigned and enjoying that experience. But I think that what is happening is that a lot of the time professors are trying to meet students in this ground that they think students are in, which is this technology form, this online social media type of aspect. But that's not particularly what all students want. And I think that in some ways it should be accommodated. Making a Facebook group is a great idea to get students to be able to communicate with each other. I've made a million study groups with people over these Facebook groups that professors provide. But I also think that a lot of the time, telling students, no, you can't use your laptop in class because I don't think that it's a great idea. But also, so using Facebook and Twitter in a way that can enhance education, but also making education something that's not Facebook and Twitter. I don't think that it should have so much to do with technology, and I think that right now it's having a lot to do with it. But to close, I think that what my editor said on my first day at USA Today was actually very interesting. He was going to put my Twitter at the bottom of my article that he was posting, and so he asked me for my Twitter handle and asked me if everything was okay on my Twitter, and then he said that Facebook and Twitter are your resume now, and that everything, no, but that not only, that's not your resume, but that people are looking at Facebook and Twitter, and it doesn't matter all of the great things that it says on your resume that you did if you're writing things that are on Twitter and Facebook that shouldn't be there. It can affect how you're going out in the real world. So I think that education should accommodate Facebook and Twitter, but kind of keep themselves as far away from it also as they can within outside snark.
So interesting, really articulate. You must have really good professors. And I know that Jane over here is one of your professors too. Two things just about Kendall, and one of the, she, I hope my bosses don't fire me over this, but we don't use a textbook in feature article writing. We use handouts that are long, and students get 3 weeks to write a long form piece, and the only assignment is they have to write about something they're personally passionate about. Passion fuels depth. Passion fuels clarity and energy, and that fuels depth, and that fuels better writing. And on that note, I'd like Valerie to enter in, who's been a writer for a long time and who's not only watched writing change from the clack, clack, clack of an IBM typewriter to our huge computers at United Press International that were like 5'3" with that glaring green writing, and now is a top banana at the Washington Post, and it not only is a fine writer and editor, but writes about education. So we're just so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, move it over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I sort of, as I was listening to Kendall, I thought we could all go home. She sort of did it brilliantly. I thought that was just an amazing presentation. It's not on?
Here. Here, Val.
Closer?
Val.
Is that better?
Here, this one
Oh,
works.
okay. Oh, that's better. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I thought she did an amazing job. Some of what she was talking about, and what we're all talking about, the effect of technology on reading and writing and critical thinking, it's out there. Technology is there. We have to acknowledge it's not going away. But I think it is the job of educators, and I am an education reporter for 20 years probably now. It's the job of educators to try to use it in a responsible way and not jump onto the fads. As Kendall said, there is no good research that says that technology is actually instrumental in improving the education experience. It can help, it can enhance, but as a fundamental way to teach, it doesn't translate into something greatly better than the old-fashioned standing, talking, having conversations, having students delve into subjects that they're interested in. I also wanted to say that Kendall was talking about educators trying to meet students in their space at the college level. Part of the reason that professors are finding that students who come to them now have what seems to be less writing skills, less critical thinking skills, is because of what's been going on in the K-12 system. The obsession with tests, the obsession with 5-paragraph essays has, I think, diminished from what I can tell talking to educators around the country for a very long time. I think it has diminished the kind of writing that many students do. Certainly not all students. No, it was never the case that everybody was good at it. There was never the case that everybody read. That we're talking about segments and what's happening to the segments of people who did used to read and who did used to write well. We see it at the Post. I've been there for 25 plus years. I've worked with some wonderful, absolutely brilliant writers, some of the best writers in America. I've worked with some people who can't write, really smart, great journalists, know how to get information, but can't write. Iris asked me, what's the difference between 15 years ago, 20 years ago when I first got there, and today? One of the things that jumps into my mind is that younger journalists today that come in, maybe they're just as smart as some of us veterans were at their age, but they have a hard time taking bits of information and putting it into a whole. Seeing the whole is the problem, because that's not the way they get information now. And again, it's not their fault when you're being asked to write essays that are only 5 paragraphs with topic sentences and supporting sentences and the conclusion. There's also been polls, I'm not really sure how representative they are, but there's enough of them to suggest that most students graduate from high school without having written a paper that's longer than 4 or 5 pages. Very often it's 3 pages, that's double-spaced with really big margins, and a bibliography that counts as part of it.
And photographs.
And maybe photographs. Nobody's being asked to write long papers. Now, one long paper, one 25-page paper in high school would change everybody's life. It just would. They would have to learn, I don't have to explain that to you. Iris wanted me to just run through quickly, and I will, so then we can have a conversation. I'll try to do this quickly. My writing journey from the Post to sort of show what's been going on. As I said, I started a long time ago, traditional writing, journalism, the pyramid style, you all know that, who, what, why, where at the beginning, and you sort of tailor it. It's still a good way to write. It's just that that's not what really happens on the web much anymore, because we've gone to blog styles. We've gone to one-issue story posts. So instead of, every story I wrote had to be the world of opinion about that subject. If I wrote a story about desk configuration in a classroom, I had to give the history and give all the different configurations and all why that was good and why it wasn't good. And I had to talk to teachers and desk designers and students, and you had to have the world. And that's the way I did it for years and years and years, and that's a slow process. And I learned to be faster at it, and I learned when to stop reporting. There's a tendency for many journalists to over-report. They don't know when to stop reporting. That's one of the things younger journalists still have a problem with. They're not quite sure when they have it. But that's how I did it for many, many years. And then about 4 years ago, my editor came to me and said, we need some of the dinosaurs in the room, meaning me, to go digital. And I just felt like crawling in a hole, because I was not somebody who was on the web. I did not tweet. I hated the word tweet. I hated the word Twitter. I couldn't stand it. I didn't know what a blog was, and they wanted me to write a blog. And so I said no, and then I went home and thought, this isn't going away. I can't pretend it's going away. So I said yes, I would do it. For the first year and a half, I was the worst blogger on the internet. I was trying to do what I did with newspapers, but just putting it on the web. Can't do that. Web writing really is different if you're writing specifically for the web. Now, newspapers put, the stories that were written for the newspapers on, and you're reading a newspaper story. But things written specifically for the web, different kind of writing. They have to be much more focused on one thing. You have to grab readers right away. And I think one of the things that all writers need to learn is that they need to grab whoever's reading it right away. the long introductions, the little introductory paragraphs, a lot of them are garbage. You have to write, rewrite, look at it again, read it out loud to yourself. The rewriting is where you learn that you've put a lot of garbage out there. So, and doing it over and over and over and over. I thought, got okay at blogging after probably writing 2,000 blog posts. Okay? That's a lot of blog posts. What I realized was that I could not be good at doing the short version without having been good at the long version. You have to be able to do the long. You have to be able to know all the issues, what's at stake, to be able to boil it down into one good thing. So, for educators, I would stress having kids. It's a lot of what Kendall said: reading books, reading long books, books kids like. Textbooks are useful for maybe some subjects sometimes, but there's got to be other ways to get information. And just having kids read and write. It's old-fashioned. It sounds like I'm a Luddite, but reading and writing, there's no substitute. And so my earlier career in writing long form has allowed me to do this little thing. You can't just go to the little thing and be really good at it, I don't think. So that's where I'll leave it, and you can carry on.
We'll go. That's so great. Yeah, what was that line you said? In order to do something,
You can't go short before you go long.
you can't go short before you go long. I just want to add, and then I want to turn it over to Chris for questions of the panel, is I finally have a student here who's a freshman, and he's taking business courses and statistics courses and all sorts of courses, and he shared with me that the best way that he's learning from these courses where there are textbooks is when the professors are telling personal stories, is when the professors are sharing narrative from their lives, when the professors are saying, we're getting beyond this high-impact research, which we hear a lot around the university, but which I know is very valuable, but where you're speaking from your heart. And, what I found, again, and I think Kendall is our poster child, is that when you walk into a classroom and say, you don't have to only write this, what do you care about? Like, what hits you in your heart? And then there's passion and perseverance and clarity and depth, and the truth takes time. And so, just to add to what Valerie said about reading and writing, I know I don't post important readings on blackboards, and I waste a lot of paper and kill a lot of trees because the students do like the crackle of paper when they're editing, and they tend to take more time with paper. And I'm going to turn it over to Christine right now to just add to anything that anyone has said that you think.
Well, I also just wanted to give you some sort of specific things you could use in your classroom, because I really think that's the value of these sessions. And I do have a little handout on some ideas you can use if you require that your students write papers. I think one thing we should talk about is sort of whether we allow gadgets in our classroom or whether they can use computers. I'd be curious how people feel about that. In my writing classes, I have them turn off their phones because I find that they can't write and have their phones, or they're under the desk, texting like that or something. And then whether they can use computers. I don't like them in my big classes because I find that it's just something else to manage in terms of, are they buying shoes instead of listening to? I've had that happen, and I think it is something we should talk about. There's an advantage to it in that they can take better notes in some ways.
And they can give you shoe tips.
And they can give me shoe tips, so that's helpful. So those are things. The other thing is there is self-control software. I don't know if you are aware of that. I have students say, I use the self-control software when I'm writing a paper so I don't go in and out of my social media sites. I think that's a fine thing. Although I do think it's kind of indicative of, if there's a problem, somebody's invented something to help us deal with it, of course. Okay, in terms of silence, I would recommend, or just say to your classes, have some silence. I'm sort of a big person on this. That we're all too noisy, and we do need time to let our brains rest, and tell them to take a walk even. Things like that are good. I mean, we need to sort of separate.
And some of the students, you really do want to say, take a walk.
Take a walk. Right. You know, just to disconnect. I mean, I think most of the research has shown that it helps all of us if we can. And, you know, now they have technology-free summer camps. That's the other thing I say to my classes. Look, if someone's making money off of this, it's a problem. So, you know, anyway. Okay, also that, you know, writing is not easy. It isn't. It's something that requires time and effort. If you can do it, I suggest they write drafts. This class I teach is 50. I can't have them write a draft of every research paper because then it's too much. But I have them write a thesis proposal, I have them do an outline, and I have them do a preliminary bibliography. And that I can go over. I also try to meet with them individually just to see that they're sort of on the right track in terms of their paper. And, you know, just to talk to them about, yeah, it's not easy. Good writing is difficult. But it can be extremely satisfying. I say, you know, if you write something you're really proud of, it's a wonderful thing to have and to share. So, and then I have some tricks. I tell them, if you say to them, read your papers out loud to yourself, I mean, no, read them out loud. I say, go to the bathroom and read your paper, and people will leave you alone. They'll catch a lot of mistakes. There's no question about that. If you read something out loud, I tell them to have a friend read it, or, you know, a roommate read it. I tell them to go to the writing center. We have, tremendous resources here on campus that they should use. I was a proofreader in a former life, and there was an old proofreading trick we used to read backwards because you can, catch more, particularly grammar and spelling errors if you read backwards, not reading for content. So that's another trick I sort of tell them. And then, you know, to put their papers aside. I don't really think they'll do that, but, you know, if they can just let them rest for a day or two and then go back and read them over, they'll catch a lot of errors. Anyway, there's a little handout here if any of you are interested in that.
Those are great. I think it's time, and I want to say I'm exceptionally proud of myself in this group. I didn't notice anyone checking their messages or emails during this group, even though maybe some of us had a burning desire to do so, including me. So anyway, let's take some questions. And I wanted to call on my colleague here, who is one of the stars of the college writing program, just to share, because I know that you know a lot about this. Maybe you could introduce yourself as well.
I'm Lacey Wooten.
Here's a...
Thanks. I'm Lacey Wooten, and I teach in the college writing program, and I have some of my other college writing colleagues back here, too. There are a number of us here. And one of the things that's really made me think about it, and Kendall, your points in particular, which were wonderful, is to what degree we need to teach all of this to them. I mean, I think that a lot of us fall into the sort of trap of thinking, oh, they're college students, so they ought to be able to do these things and they should be mature and all of that. But if we can't regulate ourselves, and I'm with Iris. I mean, when I'm grading papers and evaluating papers, I read a paper, check my Facebook, read a paper, check my Facebook, and that's being disciplined for me. So if we're like
But we're not friends. We need to be.
Yeah, yes, I need one more distraction. I think that if we can't really achieve this, then I think it's not really fair for us to expect our students to achieve it. And I think that what Kendall really made me think about were the ways in which I can train them in the kinds of practices that Chris was talking about. So, I could tell them to do things, but I think that students, freshmen in particular, which is primarily what I teach, they need to be taught how to do those things. They need to be taught how to do a draft and how to see it, and you have to make them do it, otherwise they won't do it. They need to be taught. I find now I teach my students how to read a scholarly article. They don't know how to read a scholarly article, and so I teach them how to do that. I teach them how to revise. I have revision techniques and strategies to help them see their papers. So I teach them how to revise and how to re-see. I don't necessarily have to do it. I do read their drafts, but I try to teach them the strategies they need to do those themselves. And so I think to me the real takeaway from this is thinking about what are the particular ways we can teach students to do the kinds of things, for example, that Chris was describing. And it seems like we always have more to teach. this would be one more thing, but I think it's an essential thing. You know, we can't just ask them to do it. We have to figure out ways to do it. And so that's sort of not a particular point on what to do, but it's really given me a lot to think about in terms of what I'm going to be requiring my students to do and what I can give them in terms of instructing them in how to do it.
Well, that's a great point, and we're going to flip it over to Valerie. But what I'm learning from my freshman son is that to learn how to write better and read better, we need to give them things that they're interested in, that meets them in their hearts. And so that's another thing. And I know that Valerie wants to comment on that.
Just one of the tentacles about what you're talking about. How much do students come knowing? One of the things that has resonated with me for years now was something a Harvard dean told me about maybe 10 years ago, 10 years ago. I often talk to administrators and students from colleges and K-12 schools from all over the country. And one of the things I'm interested in is what's different? How are students different today than they used to be? And the thing that I hear most often and from every level of school is that students are more dependent, okay? They're not as independent thinkers as they were 10, 15 years ago. Whether this is the curriculum at school, whether this is parenting, whatever it is, the helicopter parent phase, whatever it is, this Harvard dean said, the real difference here for me is that I walk around Harvard Yard and I see kids on their cell phone talking to their mothers about making their haircutting appointments for them because the cell phone is the longest umbilical, why can't I talk, umbilical cord in the world now. And so when you think about what you think students should know, you probably should assess before you think you know about what they can do because they've gone through K-12 being told what to do far more than they used to be. There's more scripted curriculum. There's more directed test preparation. There's not the originality and the freedom to explore that teachers used to have, and that affects the way kids have learned.
Yes, you can, and I'm going to stop immediately taking my freshman son's laundry home on Wednesdays. That's done.
Good idea, Iris.
So
done.
And I was just going to add.
And then Jane.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add that I think there are ways that it could be taught. I think that sometimes when professors kind of get off of cell phones, that kind of thing, it's also like putting ourselves back in this role of being told what to do and everything. And if somebody, this is my personal opinion about it, but if somebody in front of me in my class wants to have their head in a screen the entire time, like, personally, I'm paying too much for my education to be able to do that. And if you want to throw away what all the opportunities that are right in front of you to be able to learn, then that's on you. But I think that there are other ways to learn it. I think that one of the things that really stuck with me was Professor Lawrence was teaching us about how to not trust everything that you read online. And then so I was being told it, and I was like, yeah, sure, I know that. But then we had an assignment where we were to read an article about the Boston Marathon bombing and the Reddit article that put blamed another young man, even though he wasn't involved, and it was from Reddit, other people believing it and passing it on, and then all of a sudden, everyone just believed it because everyone else was saying it, and I remembered that so much more than anyone just sitting there being like, you can't believe everything you hear. It's just giving an example, and I sat there reading it and really invested in like what's going to happen next, because the way that the article was written was really well too. So it was there are other ways of teaching it that can actually engage and teach that lesson without having to be told.
Valerie, I want you to tell your story about not believing what people tell, but not yet. Let's let Jane, let's let some more questions, but I'd love to end with that story because it's so apropos to what our student Kendall has said. Yes? Do we need a microphone?
No, I'm good.
No.
I just, I'm thrilled to hear what Kendall said. We're all, we're all going to claim Kendall. I taught Kendall too. So.
Yeah.
In advanced reporting, and I was thrilled, with the feedback that she's given. That, I think there are a couple of things that we were talking. I was with Andrea in the Gen Ed. I teach in Gen Ed. I teach understanding. I think a couple of things we need to acknowledge. One is that teaching writing requires reading their writing and giving them feedback and helping them I do it in a class of 50, but I think we need to acknowledge, and I think, you know, the university needs to acknowledge also that if we're going to try to teach this, it takes time. And a lot of young professors are concerned about their valves. And anybody who's up for tenure is aware of that. And my takeaway from what Kendall said is we should all hold hands and jump off the disconnect cliff together and say, you can't do this. You know, however you phrase it, we're going to do something else. We are going to disconnect, and I'm going to spend the time with you. I think it feels risky. I think it's born. I'm really just delighted to hear what you had to say. I think it's born of a desire to meet your students where you live. Right? We all went into teaching and we want to meet our students and have them learn from us, but I think that actually they don't want us to seemingly pander to them and force them to join a Facebook group.
I think we should hear from some of the young people too.
Yeah, and I want to, and I don't want to leave without hearing from Gil Klein too. And could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, there's somebody
We
with a
need,
mic.
oh,
There's
someone
somebody
with
in
a
the
mic.
back.
We're so sorry.
It's
You go.
okay. It's okay. So
And introduce yourself.
do you want me to wait for?
No,
the-
you introduce yourself. You look
Okay.
young.
Hi, I'm Theo Plothy. I'm a PhD student in the SOC. What I've found interesting, and I want to bash on digital natives and millennials, because I think it's exciting what they're doing with social media and Web 2.0. But I'm going to offer a wrinkle that hasn't been mentioned yet. What I found with my students, and not my students, but when I've TA'd, is that they don't understand the performative context of computer-mediated communications. So all online communication, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, whether it's a blog, is all performative. It's performing an identity. And so if we're instructing using using Web 2.0, we ourselves as instructors are also performing an identity. And so I wanted to see what you guys, because I haven't heard this yet from the panel, what you think about those kind of queries.
Do you mean?
Yeah, can you boil it
by,
down?
by the fact that we discuss digital technology?
Yeah, just clarify the question.
Okay, so when we write online, we're performing an identity. It's a performative act. It's a representational act. And so our students who are using these things haven't been able to separate, well, this is the reason Kendall said that they're believing what they read is because, well, everything I put on, I tweet honestly and truly. But in reality, they're actually performing an identity.
And how does that differ from when they're writing in
I guess
paper?
I don't have an identity then.
Yeah. Because and how does that performative identity differ than when you're writing, and turning a paper offline? Yeah, because we're all forming an identity when we create words into sentences and paragraphs and content.
Well, I think in old school sort of Luddite terms, we've made a greater separation between putting pen to paper versus writing on our cell phone, because as digital natives and cyborgs, the phone's actually a part of our hand. It's not a separate part of our body. The phone's actually part of our body philosophically. So we just do.
So,
You know,
Val, quick
the
answer.
the kinds of things that people put on Twitter and Facebook are not things they used to put on paper, really. It's just right. It's an extension of their identity. It's almost in a way they're sort of branding themselves. There's an attitude, even when they're not trying to put attitude. I think maybe that's what you're talking about, creating this identity on the web that didn't really exist before the web, because people didn't.
That's such an interesting point, because there are many studies that say also now there's a rise in narcissism because
Right.
of this.
Right.
Because everybody, feels, well, I can express myself, on Twitter and show what I had for lunch. That there's this constant reaffirming of yourself or who you are through social media.
So I love that. So
Is that good for culture and society? I don't know.
well, we're gonna let's take a few.
sorry.
No, I mean it's good. I'm just gonna narcissistically check my mirror, look in my mirror for a minute. Yes, introduce yourself, please. And then I'd like to hear from Gil Klein, who's the former president of the National Press Club and can give a long view of all this too. Yes.
So hi, I'm Joanna Sobieski. I'm a junior in SOC, film major. So one of the things I was interested in was kind of how social media affects grading and maybe even distraction on the part of the professors, actually. I've taken a couple writing classes, and I've actually been quite disturbed to get papers back, and I always read my papers back after I get them, just because I do that. And I've noticed actually unacceptable errors on my part that have not been graded harshly. I've gotten A's and B's on papers that, frankly, I found really serious grammatical errors in after getting them back. And I'm not. That's not to slam anyone. I'm just saying, like, I worry that and that's something that Kendall brought up. Not printing things out, not really looking things over off screen. I think that is a problem on both ends of the spectrum here. And I would really urge any professors to please print and actually encourage students to print assignments out when they're editing, because I really notice a huge difference to me and the ability of myself to interact with text when I have it printed out and able to like make notes. And it's an ability that I think is really being lost when we assign text online. And I understand the movement to really push for green teaching. I understand that. But it really is difficult when you have this addiction, this strong temptation. I cannot concentrate when I have an article I need to read that's online, going between Facebook after each paragraph or even between sentences if I hear the little ding.
So
of
you
my
prefer
Facebook.
to get your handouts on
Self-control
paper.
stuff.
I have to.
You like, and so in another, I thought you were going to say, and I find red wine spots on my papers, and I'm glad you didn't say that, because I've been guilty of that. But it's coffee, it's not wine. But I think that's really important. Let's quickly hear from Gil Klein over here. That's a great point, and then I would like Chris to comment on that as well. And Gil Klein co-teaches Washington journalism semester with me as a longtime print journalist and used to be president of the National Press Club. And I just wondered what you're finding in terms of new media, old media, writing, thinking, in life.
Yes. I'm the shill in the audience here. The plant.
No, you're not.
I left daily newspapers at the end of 2007, and I've been amazed at the transformation, all the changes that have happened since I left. So we had a panel at a recent educators conference of people from Huffington Post, Politico, BuzzFeed, and I said, what has changed in writing? How should we be changing how we teach writing so that you can be up on what's happening now? And they said, the inverted pyramid form of writing is still the best. It is still what we're doing. It is still getting, if you can craft a great 25-word lead, then, isn't that 144 characters or whatever? This is still the backbone of journalism, and it has not changed. And that's what we should be teaching, that the important stuff goes up first. You've got to grab the reader's attention. You've got to get the best quote in at the top. Then you've got this diminishing importance of facts, so people will stop reading after a certain amount. They still get the most important stuff. So it's still the inverted pyramid.
And just to tell me your name again.
Joanna.
So does anybody in the audience, Joanna was talking about that she likes not to turn her assignments in online and not to, and I am a professor, maybe some of you share this, that doesn't accept assignments online as the original rewrites maybe, just so that I can spill coffee on them. So I just wondered if there's any feedback from our audience about accepting papers online versus paper papers. And then we'll hear from our panel too. Chris, afterward. Yes, tell us your name and.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you stand up? Why don't you stand up? Yeah.
Sure. So my name's Hildy Block, and I teach in the college writing program also. And I'm so glad that the junior did share that comment, because every time we say they don't read as well online, I feel like we're ignoring the fact that we then think we can turn around and grade as well online. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand that disconnect. And I actually have trouble. Last term, I allowed my students to two-sided copies when they turn in papers, which I thought was my big step towards being green. So I've never done that before. I'm like, one side, 1-inch margin, staple, white paper, 12-point font. So so I actually let them go on the back, and I actually found that harder to grade because it would bend weird and I'd have to move it. And, and I'm debating now whether to make them stay to one side of the paper. But I think that we can't separate the faculty from the students. If we're saying the students don't read as well online, if we say they do better with a book and pages they can write on, then we have to admit that we are the same when we grade them.
That's such a good point. You know what I'd like to do? I want to get a last word from each panelist, but let's take a couple more questions first. Hand there, and then you, sir. And
Hi, my name is Ariel Bernstein in the college writing program as well. I guess I had a question about, I've been seeing this really, I know we've been sort of talking about the problems with Twitter and the problems with Facebook, but I've been noticing these really interesting, beautiful, long-form journalism pieces that are now online as well. There's not necessarily as many of them, and I think it's a newer kind of, but like the New York Times had this wonderful piece on it was looking at homelessness in New York City. I'm sure many of us have read that here. That was about Dasani and looking at her experiences as a child. Homelessness, really, really long piece, and doing these interesting things in terms of combining these different types of technologies that in isolation might be kind of problematic or might be sort of the tweak kind of blurby things, actually all together in conjunction. So I'm wondering, and I guess this is a little bit of a question, whether or not some of this there might be a turn where we're actually going to be using these technologies perhaps in these kind of more traditional ways of engaging further with these longer kind of journalism pieces, and just are there ways that we can be using these technologies more productively as well?
And there is a new site, I think it's just called Longform, where people are really, I'm going to ask you a question before we get some answers here. How do you feel about reading those beautifully written, 3,000 word pieces on New York Times or Slate, Slate doesn't write that long, New Yorker, versus curled up, and again, I'm just painting this image, in your LL Bean flannels, maybe with a glass of wine. I say that often. Just reading the crackle of the paper. How do you feel?
I have mixed feelings about it because I think on one hand I really like that traditional kind of feeling of being curled up and reading something, and there's this sort of private feeling with that. At the same time, I think some of those pieces where they're actually combining different types of media, I think is exposing me to information that I might not get in other ways as well. So I know I have mixed feelings about it. There's some things that I really appreciate about it, but there's some things that I think are problematic. And I think our students feel the same way. I think we all feel the same way about this kind of ever-evolving field.
Chris?
Well, and I think you make a good point. I mean, the internet is an amazing and wonderful thing. There's no question. But it's sort of like what my mother used to say to me is everything in moderation. And I think I do think there is now maybe sort of a turn toward long-form narrative on the internet. And, I happen to like short stories, and there are wonderful, publish-yourself short story sites on the internet that I often check. But I do remember this one time in this understanding media class, we were talking about now the convergence of books onto e-readers and Kindles, and students were saying, well, we're on screens all day. We don't want to read on a screen, or what the advantages and disadvantages are. And and then Stephen King actually did this experiment where he posted chapters of a new book on the internet to see if anybody would pay for it. And of course, most people didn't. They just took the chapter. But anyway, one of the students said, well, I don't like reading on screens all the time. And so this other student said, well, just print it out. And then the student said, well, isn't that a book? Anyway, I always thought, well, yeah, that's a good point. Anyway.
That's what Kendall said about printing out. Now that the Eagle has gone online, they still edit in paper form. And I know you were very excited when you did have that paper supplement. Yes?
Yeah, it was very exciting.
We have a question over there in the blue suit, and then back there. Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, this man was next. I'm sorry. Yeah, and if you want to, you comment.
Larry Levin, and I'm SOC. So if we don't teach a writing course, but we demand good writing, how do we get that from our students?
I have a little tip.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think
Teaching a writing class.
What do you teach?
I don't teach a writing class. It's a.
Oh, okay. So as far as
What do you teach?
Visual literacy.
Do they have to write for you?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
It's the same
a
thing.
lot.
It's the same
So-
process.
So
It's the
Kendall-
same process, yes, but how do I'm not a writing instructor. How do we demand the good writing from them?
This is what Stephen King says. If you want to be a writer, you must do two things: read a lot and write a lot. So are you giving them engaging, well-written, detailed articles?
Trying to.
And also just to read a lot. And Kendall could come tutor them.
Well, also, I would
that's-
spell out your expectations
Oh,
for the
yeah,
paper.
the first slide in my PowerPoint, it's from Strunk and White. It's from Elements of Style.
Okay, 'cause
So
I think that helps.
you
You at least are clear what
I
you
push
want.
that, and it's just so hard sometimes. Sometimes you get students who really understand it and who write brilliantly, and other stuff you just can't. It's like, oh, I can't stand reading this.
Well,
So
Go ahead.
I mean, I personally learn more from, like when I took the feature article writing class, I'd never written a feature article before. No one had ever taught me how to write a feature article before. I kind of went into it blind. But what I started doing was I started reading a lot of that and kind of learning from there. So I guess just for visual literacy, I've had a few friends take the class to do some fun projects. But I guess like I particularly learn more from just seeing what other people are doing, and then I kind of form my own kind of groove from off the shoulders of what I've seen.
So you'd like to
people-
see maybe past students' work
Past
something to
students
say?
work, I like past students work that is, a lot of my professors have done like past students work that have gotten A's, and that's been good. Sometimes it could be, if it's past students work though, sometimes it can kind of like get it too much in my way of just like, is this exactly what they're looking for? I'm going to try to model my paper exactly after this. So instead maybe like I'm just comparing it to like my journalism classes of just like getting these articles and being like, read them when you're home. So I'm just reading from a bunch of different authors, what a bunch of different people did, and then kind of learning what is expected out of, for that example, visual literacy.
On my blog, I publish a lot of guest writers, and a lot of them are professors, and a lot of them can't write. So I think your point is important. Not everybody knows how. Most professors don't know how to teach good writing. Most of them can't do it, or I don't know most, but a lot of them can't do it. And so it seems to me it would have to be a university-wide effort to try to teach, professors across the curriculum the basics of how to do that.
Well,
That would be.
That's a very good point, Valerie, because we actually do
Yeah, we have a
have
writing
a
or
committee
something.
now
Okay.
that's looking at writing, founded really by the college writing
Yeah,
program.
I just want to say.
To look at
It's-
writing
this
across
is
the
important.
curriculum. And we've had focus groups and have talked about many ideas. Partly, I mean, I think one thing is at CTRL, we could have a site, to say, here are handouts and things that can help you show your students, what good writing is or tips.
I usually bring someone in from the writing center to come in and say, here, this is what we offer.
That's
Oh,
a
yeah,
great.
that's
That's a good idea.
Well, go on.
Would you prefer to have blue books? Go back to the old school, do blue books?
God, that's what I.
Oh, like the blue book for finals and
Yeah.
things? I mean, is that old school? That's what I've been doing.
Say one more thing.
I just wanted to say one other.
I
I just want to say one other quick thing about long form on reading online. I think some of this will play out. It's a new technology. Things always go crazy when there's something new. Long form has always been there. Actually, newspapers have been putting their long stuff on. I think some of this will change based on how research shows how the brain actually absorbs information. There's mixed research on it now. There's not conclusive research at all, but there is some that shows that the eye doesn't take in to the brain, however this works, as clearly on a backlit screen, on a certain kind of screen, as it does on paper. I don't know the mechanics of it, but a neuroscientist does. There's also the issue, again, of being on screens all the time. When people start having their hands fall off when they're 30, having carpal tunnel when they're 25, you're going to start to see some things change, I think.
Yeah, well, and I'm just going to add a point before we take another question from, I'm going to add on is that one of the suggestions I do when I get a class that people have never really written well, is rather than do a PowerPoint, which tends to sometimes lose our students, is to ask each of them to bring in an article that interests them and they think is written well about visual media, and do individual presentations where they're invested, interested, and they have to look at good writing. I mean, the way you learn to write well is to read a lot of good writing and to write a lot. And it's really, I find that in our Washington journalism semester class, where 2/3 of the kids are from different countries, that when they really have to look at something that's written well and they have to present it and tell why it's written well, they'll choose something they're interested in, be it gun control or abortion or gay marriage or, anything. And they're really invested in it. I'm going to take a question from...
I'll just make a little promotion too, that the college writing program, if you need information on how to teach writing in your classroom, they have a session this afternoon, right?
Oh, good.
3:30 to 4, and they have this book called Easy Writer that all college writing students have to buy, and you can reference this in your own classroom and say, you have an Easy Writer book, you should know something about writing. So
that's
anyway,
great.
go to this session. They can also help you write.
Okay, you've been so patient. Tell us who you are, and maybe you need a microphone or you have one.
Just quickly, I'm Bram Groen from the School of International Service. I teach intercultural communications. And Kendall has not been in my class yet.
Seems like you're the only one.
All right.
You're not getting her.
I came in thinking I'm going to do my Blue Book midterm exam on computers this time around. And after half an hour listening, I'm going, well, I'm not so sure whether I should do that or not. I thought I was old-fashioned, and now maybe I'm really young-fashioned. I don't know what the answer is after this conversation.
Well,
and maybe the best answer is that we go to the students and say, we're going to do this on computers if you would like to. If you want to write it down, because you do that better, you get to write this down. But I'll let you choose. Kendall, what do you think?
I think that's how everyone should, I think that's the best way to go about it, because I think that for somebody like myself who's kind of trying to keep an arm's length from being completely immersed in technology, I think that a lot of the time it's kind of forced upon students to get into that world, because I think that people are generalizing that it's kind of my generation that just would rather do their work online, but it's not particularly. I think that's a great idea, because then in those cases, if somebody like myself is less comfortable with taking a final online, that's my final grade, and I want to take it in a way that I think I'll produce the best of my work.
Let me ask a question. We're each going to give you a takeaway comment, and we're going to end, in a few minutes before lunch. How many of you still enjoy reading paper? That you go to bed not only with your iPhone slumped on your chest, but a novel. And raise your hands high. Okay, so that's really the majority of you. How many of you really prefer the online version and read your newspapers online and wake up with your cup of coffee with your iBook in front of you? Okay. So it's mixed. It is mixed. And, I think just to follow up on your comment, giving the students a choice can have it's good and bad. But, maybe it should stem from, how do we feel that we read better, and how do we feel that we write better? And sometimes the long form of writing, just to circle back, if the truth takes time and clarity takes time and writing a good sentence takes time, then maybe taking the time to write might be a better form. And I'm just going to invite all of you, and then I'm going to give Chris the microphone. My 6th book is coming out on Valentine's Day, and it's on a subject that maybe some of you are interested, sex and aging. And I'll be at Politics and Prose on Thursday evening, February 13th, and I'm going to talk about not only the book, but about how in this increasingly chattery, loud, noisy environment, how hard it is to really do deep research and put together a book which people still read. And I'll just share that my iBooks sell as well as the print versions. And Chris, what's your takeaway for this day?
Well, I also found a little quote that sort of fun. But actually, I liked this one because Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote that people do not deserve good writing because they're so pleased with the bad. But I do think we have sort of an obligation to at least say to students that good writing, one, is going to help you in life. There's no question about that. It's that the top three of every profession, when employers are asked, they say they want people that can write clearly and concisely. And I think this is very true today. We are inundated with words today. And I think we need to help our students understand that just writing is not good writing, that good writing is a discipline and a process and is not easy. So.
That's right. Okay, Val, your takeaway?
Well, I'm going to go get a teaching degree so I can teach Kendall. So I'm feeling really left out.
Okay, and Kendall, wait, I want you to
Wait.
tell your story. You want to tell your Miami story? Are you guys okay if we run 3 minutes over? Yeah, because we've got.
All right. My takeaway would be that what we thought as old, the old basics, the basics are basics. You still have to write well. You have to have the information. You have to make sure it's right. The rush of technology today in journalism, where it goes so fast that things sometimes they slip through. That's, cable TV, we all know how often they get things wrong because they're not sourcing things anymore. The proliferation of news organizations now, a lot of these news organizations do not have the same standards. At the Washington Post, New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, we attempt to keep them. The story she wants to tell you, this was a long time ago. It tells you even the pressure back then. I think it was 1983. I was in Miami. Riots broke out. I was at the UPI Bureau, running the UPI Bureau at the time. I was the only one, and these riots broke out over a story that was going around that a boy had been killed in one of the in this Overtown area that I worked at, near where we worked at, by a police officer for no reason. And everybody else was reporting that he was dead. Now, everybody else at the time wasn't everybody like we have today, but it was the local news, radio stations, AP, UPI, Reuters, and the TV stations. And my editors from New York kept calling me and saying, "You're the only one who's not reporting that this kid's dead." The reason I wasn't reporting it is because I couldn't prove it. I had called the police station, and the police station said, "He's not dead, he's just critical." I had just moved from the LA Times back to Miami and actually didn't have sources yet. But so I called the emergency room and sort of begged my way to talk to a nurse and said, I begged her, "You have to tell me. You have got to tell me." Poured out my story. The nurse was really nice. She said, "He's not dead. He's not dead. He might be, but he's not yet." And so I wrote back to my little editors in Atlanta and said, "He's not dead. I'm not going to say he's dead." They were literally yelling on the phone, but they're reporting it in Europe, everywhere. They're reporting it. He's dead. I won't say he's dead. If you want to report that he's dead, you can, not without my name. And secretly, I told myself, my God, if this kid dies, I know this is uncharitable, but I said, I hope he waits long enough so that I can be proved right. And that is what happened. So
the truth takes time.
The truth takes time. When kids write, give them time. Give them time to get it right, really, to get the facts right, too. I mean, it's not just structure. It's what they're saying. It's making sure that they're saying something that's worth saying. That's
Kendall,
my takeaway.
your last parting words to this group.
I guess that I would say that as far as the internet goes and as far as Facebook and Twitter, but just like technology in general, just like being aware that it's there and being able to use it in the way that it should be used. But also, I think that we need to keep it at arm's length, but also not just put it down completely, because it's like it's here to stay. I mean, I have babysat a few younger kids, and they're getting laptops from their schools, from their K through 12 schools right now. So it's only going to get more and more challenging. So I think that completely saying, like, keeping it out of education isn't a good idea. But I think that showing what's good with the internet and what's not, the woman over there that I talked about, the Dasani article, I read that too. It was wonderful. But it was a really great display of how you can use the internet to have this long-form journalism piece, but also use the internet for its advantage of, like, there were 5 parts to it, and once you scrolled through part 1 to get to the other, the 2, like, attached to make this picture so that it was, like, photography. It's very hard to explain, but so I think that showing what's necessary to be able to read and write well, but also I think that it should show them where to get show them what websites are good to get their information from, show them that, like, what is good writing that is online, because it's still there, it's still somewhere, but I think that it's just harder to sift through all of this craziness to find the good things now.
And don't leave without getting this tip sheet from our Christine Lawrence. And thank you all so much. This was really fun for all of us.